My fiancé's cousin wasn't just a homewrecker. She was part of a meticulously planned scheme to steal everything I had. Liam and I were the couple everyone else hated. You know the type. The sickeningly sweet, finish each other's sentences, can't keep our hands off each other even after 3 years type. We had a little apartment downtown that was more plant than furniture, a shared calendar that was color-coded to perfection, and a future so clearly mapped out it was practically a blueprint. We'd picked out the ring a simple, elegant emerald cut, we'd argued playfully over baby names, and we'd even started a joint savings account called the Future Fund. To me, our life wasn't just good. It was solid. It was real. It was the foundation upon which I was building my entire world. So when he told me his cousin was moving to the city, I was genuinely excited for him. "My cousin Chloe," he'd announced over dinner one night, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in a while. "You're going to love her, babe. We were practically inseparable growing up." He went on to paint a picture of a childhood I'd never been a part of, full of inside jokes about tree houses and summer camps, and a shared pet turtle named Sheldon. I'd never heard him mention a Chloe before, not once in 3 years, but he explained she'd been living abroad for the last decade, and they'd just recently reconnected. It made sense. Families are complicated. I just smiled and said I couldn't wait to meet her. The first time Chloe came over, she breezed into our apartment like a gust of wind, all flowing hair, jangling bracelets, and a laugh that was just a little too loud. She was beautiful, in that effortless, girl-next-door way that magazines are always trying to replicate. She hugged me warmly, but her eyes immediately found Liam. "Look at you," she squealed, pulling him into a hug that lasted just a beat too long. "All grown up and domestic." Liam laughed, a deep, hearty sound he usually reserved for when his favorite football team scored. He hugged her back, his hand resting a little too low on the small of her back. I felt a tiny, stupid flicker of something in my stomach. I told myself to stop being ridiculous. This was his family. Over the next 2 weeks, Chloe became a permanent fixture in our lives. She was just stopping by after work. She was craving my famous lasagna, a recipe Liam had given her. She was having trouble with her landlord and needed Liam's advice. It was always Liam. She'd barely acknowledge me beyond a cursory, "Hey," before launching into a long, animated story directed solely at my boyfriend. They had a language of their own, woven from shared memories and knowing glances that I couldn't decipher. I started to feel like a guest in my own home, an audience member watching a 2-person play. I tried to bring it up with Liam, gently at first. "Chloe seems great," I'd said one night as we were getting into bed. "It's just, you two are very close." He'd pulled me in, kissed my forehead, and dismissed my concerns with a lazy smile. "Of course we are, babe. We're family. It's not like that. You're just not used to my crazy relatives." He said it so easily, so convincingly that I felt ashamed. I was being the jealous, insecure girlfriend. I was creating drama where there was none. So I pushed the feeling down. I smiled wider whenever Chloe came over. I offered her drinks. I asked about her new job. I tried. God, I tried. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I got home early from work, a migraine pounding behind my eyes. I walked in quietly, not wanting to talk to anyone, just wanting to grab some painkillers and lie down. The apartment was silent, but I could hear faint murmuring from the kitchen. I figured Liam was on the phone. As I rounded the corner, the scene in front of me seared itself into my brain. Liam was leaning against the counter, and Chloe was standing in front of him, so close her body was almost pressed against his. His back was mostly to me, but I could see his hand cupping her jaw. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It wasn't a quick, familial greeting. It was a kiss on the lips. It was short, but it was lingering. It was tender and possessive, and it was everything a kiss between cousins should never, ever be. They broke apart as I must have made a sound, a tiny gasp that I couldn't hold back. Chloe's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before her face settled back into a placid smile. Liam turned, his own smile unwavering. "Hey, babe, you're home early," he said, his voice as casual as if he'd just been discussing the weather. My heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could see was the ghost of that kiss hanging in the air between them. I managed a weak smile, mumbled something about my head hurting, and fled to our bedroom, the lie tasting like acid on my tongue. Lying in the dark, my mind raced. I replayed every interaction, every lingering touch, every inside joke. It was all there, a flashing neon sign I had been willfully ignoring. The anger came first, hot and blinding. Then came the crushing weight of betrayal. The man I was going to marry, the future we had planned. It all felt like a sham. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to march out there and demand an explanation. But some cold, calculating part of me took over. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a hysterical outburst. I wasn't going to let them gaslight me again. I was going to play their game. I waited until I heard Chloe leave. Then I walked back into the living room, my face a carefully constructed mask of normalcy. "Feeling a bit better," I said brightly to Liam. "Hey, I was thinking we haven't had a proper dinner with Chloe yet. Why don't I cook for us all tomorrow night? A real welcome to the city celebration." Liam's face lit up, relief washing over his features. He thought he'd gotten away with it. "That's a great idea, babe. She'll love that." He wrapped his arms around me, kissing the top of my head. I didn't flinch. I let him hold me, my body rigid, my mind a whirlwind of ice and fire. The next evening, I cooked. I made his favorite pasta. I opened the good bottle of wine we'd been saving. I set the table with our best plates. The three of us sat there, Chloe chattering away about some drama at her new office, Liam laughing and adding his own commentary. They looked so comfortable, so happy. I just smiled, refilled their glasses, and waited. I let the silence hang for a moment after Chloe finished a particularly funny story. They both looked at me, expecting me to join in the laughter. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, the cold glass a stark contrast to the fire burning in my chest. I set it down on the table with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. I looked from Liam's smiling face to Chloe's, a perfect picture of familial bliss, and I cleared my throat. "I just have one question," I said, my voice eerily calm, betraying none of the hurricane raging inside my chest. I pinned Liam with my gaze, ignoring Chloe completely for a moment. "It's about family traditions. I'm just curious." I paused, letting the tension stretch until it was a thin, humming wire. I picked up my wine glass and swirled the dark red liquid, watching it cling to the sides. "Since when do cousins kiss like that?" The sound of Chloe's fork clattering against her ceramic plate was explosive in the sudden silence. Liam's face went through a rapid series of transformations. Confusion, then a flash of panic, then it settled on a mask of indignant anger. He let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was a brittle, ugly sound. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice a little too loud. "Kiss like what? Babe, what's gotten into you? You're acting crazy." "Am I?" I asked softly, taking another sip of wine. I finally turned my eyes to Chloe. She had a hand pressed to her chest, her face a perfect portrait of wounded innocence. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You mean yesterday? In the kitchen? That was just a quick hello. We always do that. It's just a family thing. We're very affectionate." "Affectionate," I repeated the word, tasting it. It tasted like a lie. "Liam, you had your hand on her jaw. You pulled her towards you. It lasted for 5 full seconds, I counted. That's not a quick hello. That's not a peck. It was intimate. It was practiced. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, and I watched them land, watched them flinch." Liam slammed his palm down on the table, making the glasses jump. "I can't believe this!" he boomed, his face flushed a deep red. "I told you we were close. I told you. And this is what you do? You invent some sordid fantasy in your head because you're feeling jealous? You're trying to ruin a beautiful family reunion because you're insecure. After everything, this is what you think of me." The accusations rained down on me. The exact words I had feared, the exact words he had used before to make me doubt my own intuition. But this time, they didn't sting. They bounced off the cold, hard certainty of what I had seen. "Insecure?" I said, my voice dropping lower. "No, Liam, I'm not insecure. I'm awake. For weeks I have sat in my own living room and felt like a stranger. I've watched the lingering looks, the hands on each other's arms, the inside jokes you never bothered to explain. And every single time I told myself I was crazy. I let you convince me I was the problem." I looked from his furious face to Chloe's tear-stained one. "And you," I said to her, my voice dripping with contempt, "you just lapped it up, didn't you? You came into my home, ate the food I cooked for you, and looked me in the eye, all while you were—" "What? Sleeping with my boyfriend?" "No," Chloe cried, the tears now flowing freely. "It's not like that. You're twisting everything. Liam is my family. He's just been looking out for me since I moved here. You're trying to destroy that." She reached a hand across the table towards me, a plea in her eyes. "Please don't do this. You're making this horrible." I almost laughed. I was making this horrible? The audacity was breathtaking. "Family," I said, the word a bitter pill in my mouth. "You both keep using that word like it's some magical shield that makes everything okay. It's the foundation of this whole performance, isn't it? All those lovely stories you told me, Liam, about the treehouse in your backyard and the summers at the lake and that pet turtle named Sheldon. All your shared memories with your dear cousin." Liam seized on it, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He thought I was softening, that I was remembering the narrative he had so carefully crafted. "Exactly," he said, his voice earnest. "That's our history. You can't just erase that because of one misunderstood moment." He thought he was winning. He thought he could still talk his way out of it. He had no idea what was coming. "Those stories were so sweet," I said, my voice turning syrupy sweet. "So compelling. I just wanted to know more. So I did something this afternoon while I was chopping vegetables for this lovely dinner." I paused, making sure I had both of their undivided, terrified attention. "I gave your mom a call." I watched the color drain from Liam's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Chloe's mouth fell open slightly. "We had a wonderful chat," I continued, a slow, cruel smile spreading across my face. "We talked about her garden, about your dad's golf game, and then I told her how absolutely lovely it was to have finally met your cousin, Chloe." There was a very long pause on the other end of the line. "Your mom was—" confused. Very confused. She said she'd love to meet this mysterious Chloe sometime. Mostly because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Liam, your mother is an only child. The silence that fell over the dining table was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, pressing down on us, sucking all the air out of the room. The carefully constructed world Liam had built around me didn't just crack. It imploded. Chloe looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Her face was ashen, her previous performance of a wronged victim completely abandoned. She stared at her plate, her hands clenched in her lap, a statue carved from guilt. But Liam just stared at me. The anger, the indignation, the theatrical outrage, it all vanished, replaced by a cold, flat emptiness. It was the look of a man who had been cornered, a man whose every escape route had just been sealed shut. What? The word was barely a whisper, a hollow sound that he seemed to push from his lungs with the last of his strength. I enunciated each word with a brutal clarity. "Your mother is an only child, which means you don't have any aunts or uncles, which means, darling, you don't have any cousins." I held his gaze, refusing to let him look away. "So I'm going to ask you again, who is she?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in the 3 years I had known him, Liam, the man who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket and charm a statue, was utterly speechless. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting between me and Chloe, the cogs in his brain grinding furiously, trying to find a new lie, a new angle. But there was none. The foundation was gone. It was Chloe who finally broke the silence. She pushed her chair back from the table, the scraping sound echoing like a gunshot. She stood up, not looking at me, not looking at Liam, just staring at the wall behind me. "I should go," she mumbled, her voice thick. "Oh, no, you don't," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You sit down. You're not going anywhere." My tone held a command she clearly didn't expect. She froze, half standing, and then slowly, meekly, sank back into her chair. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely it was almost dizzying. A few minutes ago, they had been a united front gaslighting me, trying to make me feel small and crazy. Now they were two guilty children caught red-handed, and I was the one holding all the cards. "Liam," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "the truth. Now." He finally broke, slumping in his chair like a marionette with its strings cut. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, the fight completely gone out of him. "Her name is Chloe," he said, his voice flat and defeated. We met at work." "At work?" I repeated. "And how long have you been meeting at work?" He swallowed hard. 6 months. 6 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. 6 months of lies, 6 months of me happily planning our future, putting money into our future fund, while he was building a second life behind my back. Every late night at the office, every unexplained work trip, every distracted conversation flashed through my mind. It was a highlight reel of my own stupidity. "So when you told me you were in San Diego for that urgent conference last month?" He couldn't meet my eyes. He just nodded, staring at the tablecloth. "And Chloe here." I turned my attention back to the woman who was trying to shrink into nothingness. "I assume your landlord isn't actually giving you any trouble?" She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Right. And the lasagna recipe Liam gave you? Was it my lasagna recipe? The one my grandmother taught me?" She flinched, then gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The pure, unadulterated rage that filled me was so potent it made my vision swim for a second. The intimacy of that, the violation, was somehow worse than the kiss. She had taken something that was mine, something precious and personal, and woven it into their lie. "So this whole charade," I continued, my voice trembling slightly with the effort of keeping it level, "this elaborate cousin story. What was the end game? Did you think I was just never going to find out? Did you think you could just keep her in our lives? In my home? Indefinitely?" Liam finally looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a desperate, pathetic plea. "I didn't know what to do," he said, his voice cracking. "I love you. I do. I never wanted to lose you. But things with Chloe, it got complicated." "Complicated," I scoffed. "Sleeping with your coworker behind your girlfriend's back isn't complicated, Liam. It's simple. It's called cheating." "I was going to end it with her," he insisted, leaning forward, his voice rising in desperation. "I swear. This whole moving here thing, her being around all the time, it was too much. I knew it couldn't go on. I was just trying to figure out how to let her down gently." I looked over at Chloe. Her head snapped up at his words, her eyes wide with shock and a fresh wave of pain. So that was his next move, throw her under the bus to save himself. It was classic Liam. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You disgust me," I said, the words coming out low and venomous. "Both of you." I stood up, my own chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The meal I had so carefully prepared sat untouched, a mockery of the life I thought I had. "Get out!" Chloe practically scrambled from her chair, grabbing her purse and muttering a string of apologies as she all but ran for the door. She didn't look back, but Liam didn't move. He just sat there, watching me, his face a mess of regret and panic. "Babe, please," he whispered. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I know I messed up. I messed up worse than I ever have in my life, but we can't throw away 3 years over this. Please, just talk to me." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice cold. "I want you to pack a bag, and I want you to be gone by the time I get back." "Get back?" he asked, confused. "Where are you going?" I walked to the front closet and pulled out my coat. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't be in that apartment with him for one more second. My hand was on the doorknob when his next words stopped me cold. "Is this about the money?" he asked, his voice suddenly changing, taking on a strange, calculating edge. "The future fund? Because that's joint, you know. We put that together. You can't just—" I turned back slowly to face him, a new kind of chill seeping into my bones, colder than the betrayal, colder than the anger. The future fund. Our joint savings account. The nest egg for the house, the wedding, the life we were supposed to build. We'd both been contributing to it for over a year. I just deposited my quarterly bonus into it last week, a significant chunk of money. His sudden concern for our finances, right at this moment, felt alarmingly out of place. It felt predatory. "What about the money, Liam?" I asked, my hand tightening on the doorknob. He stood up, taking a step towards me. "I just mean, we need to be adults about this. We need to figure out how to split things up properly, starting with that account." Something in his eyes, a flicker of something calculating and greedy, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I opened my banking app, a terrible, sickening premonition dawning on me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated to the joint savings account page. And then I saw it. The screen loaded and the number staring back at me made the world tilt on its axis. The account balance wasn't just low. It was practically zero. Under recent transactions, there was only one entry, dated 2 days ago, a massive wire transfer for nearly the entire balance. The destination was an account I didn't recognize, an account under the name Chloe Miller. The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. I stared at the screen, at the glowing red numbers of the transaction, at her name Chloe Miller, and a roaring sound filled my ears, drowning out everything else. $50,000. Our future. Gone. Transferred 2 days ago, the day before he'd kissed her in my kitchen. The migraine I'd had that day was nothing compared to the explosion of pain and white-hot fury that detonated behind my eyes right now. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, premeditated theft. This was a conspiracy. I lifted my head and looked at Liam. Really looked at him. The man I thought I knew, the man I'd loved and trusted with every fiber of my being, had vanished. In his place stood a stranger, a common thief with a familiar face. The pathetic, pleading expression was gone, replaced by a sullen, defensive glare. He saw the realization dawning on my face, and he knew the game was up. There was no more groveling, no more begging for forgiveness. We were past that now. "You son of a bitch," I whispered, the words raw and guttural. "You stole from me." "It's not stealing," he snapped, his voice sharp and ugly. "It's a joint account. My name is on it too. It's my money just as much as it's yours." "Your money?" I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Liam, you haven't had a steady paycheck in 8 months since you were restructuring at your firm. I put that money in there. That was my bonus, my savings. You contributed maybe $5,000 to that account. Total." My voice was rising, escalating into a shout, and I didn't care. The carefully controlled calm I had maintained all evening shattered into a million pieces. "You were planning this all along, weren't you? The whole Cousin Chloe is moving to the city story wasn't just a cover for your affair. It was the setup for this. You moved her here to bleed me dry." "You're hysterical," he sneered, taking a step back, as if my anger were a physical thing he could dodge. Chloe needed help getting set up. A deposit for an apartment, furniture. It's expensive here. It was a loan. She's going to pay it back." "A loan? You gave my life savings to your mistress as a loan?" I was screaming now, pacing the small space between the door and the living room like a caged animal. Did you really think I was that stupid? That I would just never notice $50,000 had vanished into thin air? "I was going to tell you," he yelled back, his own volume matching mine. "I was going to find the right time to explain it, but you had to go behind my back, calling my mom, setting this whole dramatic dinner trap. You blew this all up." The audacity of it, the sheer unmitigated gall of him trying to blame me, was so staggering it momentarily silenced me. He had orchestrated this entire betrayal, and somehow, in his twisted reality, I was the villain for exposing it. He wasn't just a cheater and a thief, he was a narcissist of the highest order. Every memory of the last 6 months recontextualized itself in an instant. Every time he'd encouraged me to put more money into the fund, every time he'd praised my financial discipline, it wasn't pride, it was avarice. He was fattening the calf for slaughter, and I had been the willing, idiotic calf. "Get out," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. I pointed at the door. "Pack your things and get out of my apartment." "Your apartment?" He laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "My name is on the lease too, remember. I have just as much right to be here as you do. You can't just kick me out." He was right. Legally, he was right. We had signed the lease together. My mind raced, panic warring with a cold, rising tide of determination. I couldn't stay here with him. I wouldn't. But I also wouldn't be the one to leave. This was my home. I had paid for almost everything in it. I looked around the room, at the plants I had nurtured, the art I had chosen, the life I had built. I wasn't surrendering it to him and his grifting girlfriend. "Fine," I said, my voice like ice. "Then I'll call the police." His face paled slightly. "And tell them what? That your boyfriend moved money out of your shared bank account? They'll laugh you out of the station. It's a civil matter, babe, and you don't have a leg to stand on." He was smug. He thought he had me. He'd clearly thought this through. He knew the legal loopholes, the gray areas that would protect him. He thought he was untouchable. But he had underestimated me. He had mistaken my love for weakness, my trust for stupidity. He had forgotten who I was before I met him. I had worked my way through law school as a paralegal. I didn't practice anymore, having moved into corporate compliance. But I hadn't forgotten everything. And I knew that while what he did with the joint account was a legal gray area, creating an elaborate fiction to gain financial trust could be something else entirely. "Maybe," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "Or maybe I'll tell them about how you and your accomplice, Chloe Miller, conspired to commit fraud, about how you created a false identity for her, your cousin, with the express purpose of gaining my trust to defraud me of a significant amount of money. I have text messages, Liam, weeks of them, all about your poor, struggling cousin Chloe and how we should help her. That's not a civil matter. That's a criminal conspiracy." The color drained completely from his face. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the smugness replaced by a dawning horror. He'd never considered that. He'd seen the bank account as his only vulnerability, and he thought he had that covered. He hadn't thought about the narrative, the intricate web of lies he'd spun for me over text and email for weeks. The evidence. "You're bluffing," he whispered. But there was no conviction in his voice. "Am I?" I asked, holding his gaze. "There's a very easy way to find out. You can pack a bag and walk out that door right now, and I will consider the $50,000 a very expensive, very painful lesson learned. I will never speak to you again, and you can go live your life with your thief of a girlfriend. Or you can stay. And I will pick up this phone, and I will dial 911, and I will press charges. We can let the district attorney decide who has a case." We stood there in a silent standoff, the air crackling with unspoken threats. His mind was clearly racing, weighing the options, realizing the beautiful, simple con he thought he'd pulled off had just become a tangled, dangerous mess. He looked at me, at the unyielding resolve in my eyes, and he knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I would burn my own life to the ground just to watch his burn with it. Finally, with a curse under his breath, he turned on his heel and stalked towards the bedroom. I didn't relax. I stood by the door, my heart pounding, listening to the sounds of him, angrily throwing things into a suitcase. A few minutes later, he emerged, pulling a small roller bag, his jacket slung over his shoulder. He wouldn't look at me. He walked towards the door, stopping just in front of me. "I did love you, you know," he muttered, his voice low. "No, you didn't," I replied, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You loved what I could do for you." He flinched, then brushed past me and pulled the door open. He was halfway out into the hallway when he stopped and turned back, a strange, vindictive smirk playing on his lips. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you got the last word." He shook his head slowly. "You have no idea what's coming. The money was just for her deposit. You should really be worried about what she's been doing for the last 2 weeks while you were at work and she had the spare key I made for her." His words hung in the air like toxic smoke, long after he'd slammed the door behind him. A spare key. My stomach twisted into a knot of ice. For 2 weeks while I was at my desk, believing she was just stopping by occasionally, Chloe had a key. She had free, unfettered access to my home, my space, my life. The violation I felt earlier was a pale shadow of the creeping dread that now washed over me. What had she been doing? What had they been planning? His parting shot wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the door, my body trembling. For a moment, I was paralyzed by the sheer scale of the deception. Then, a cold, methodical anger took over. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a detective in the ruins of my own life. I started in the bedroom. At first glance, everything looked normal. My clothes were in the closet, my books were on the nightstand. But then I started to look closer. My jewelry box, which I always kept on my dresser, was slightly askew. I opened it, my heart hammering. The expensive pieces, my grandmother's diamond earrings, a pearl necklace my parents gave me for graduation, were all there. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was premature. Tucked away in a velvet pouch at the bottom was my mother's original engagement ring. She had given it to me when Liam and I started talking about marriage, a family heirloom meant for my future. It was a beautiful, unique antique. The pouch felt light. I opened it. It was empty. They hadn't taken the flashy, easily traceable jewelry. They had taken the one thing that was priceless, irreplaceable, and emotionally devastating. I moved on to my office, a small room where I kept my personal files and my work laptop. I checked my desk drawers. My passport was gone. My social security card was gone. My birth certificate, which I kept in a fireproof box, was also missing. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a simple theft for cash. This was identity theft. They weren't just taking my money and my heirlooms, they were trying to take my entire life. I booted up my personal laptop, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. As the screen lit up, a pop-up window appeared. Enter new password. They had locked me out of my own computer. I suddenly remembered Chloe asking me seemingly innocent questions about my first pet's name, my mother's maiden name, my childhood street, all the standard security questions. I had answered without a second thought, charmed by her supposed interest in my life. She hadn't been making conversation. She'd been harvesting my data. This was so much bigger than I thought. This was a sophisticated, well-planned operation. The money transfer was just the beginning. They were setting me up for financial ruin, for a bureaucratic nightmare that could take years to unravel. Panic began to set in, sharp and suffocating. But then, I thought of my mom's ring on Chloe's finger. I thought of Liam's smug parting sneer, and the panic receded, replaced by a glacial, diamond-hard resolve. They thought I was just some heartbroken woman they could roll over. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I knew Liam was right about one thing. A local cop wouldn't know what to do with a case this complex. They would see a messy breakup. I needed bigger guns. My job in corporate compliance meant I worked with all sorts of investigators, forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, private detectives. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone, calling in every favor I was owed. I explained the situation calmly and clinically to a friend of mine, a brilliant cybersecurity analyst named Marco. He told me not to touch my laptop, that he would come by in the morning to create a mirror image of the hard drive. Next, I called a retired police detective turned PI named Sal, a gruff old bear of a man who specialized in tracking down con artists. I laid out the fraud, the missing documents, the stolen ring. I could hear him scribbling notes on the other end. Finally, I made the hardest call. I called my parents. I told them everything, my voice finally breaking as I admitted my mother's ring was gone. There was no "I told you so," no judgment, only quiet, steady support. My dad, a tax attorney with a bulldog's tenacity, immediately started making calls to the credit bureaus to freeze my credit. The three of us, Marco, Sal, and my dad, became my personal army. The next few days were a blur of activity. Marco uncovered a treasure trove of information on my laptop. Chloe hadn't just locked me out, she'd been clumsy. She'd used my computer to search for non-extradition countries, to apply for credit cards in my name, and in a moment of unbelievable arrogance, to log into her own social media. Her profile was a roadmap of her life, including photos of her with a man I didn't recognize, her real boyfriend, a man she was clearly conning alongside Liam. Sal, the PI, used this information to track her down in less than 48 hours. She and Liam had used my money to rent a luxury short-term apartment across town, planning to lay low before making their next move. The final piece of the puzzle was the ring. Sal found out they had an appointment at a high-end pawn shop that afternoon, likely to sell the ring for cash to fund their escape. That's when I finally called the police. But I didn't call the local precinct. I called a detective in the economic crimes unit that Sal had a connection with, and we arranged a little welcome party. I was there, sitting in an unmarked car with Sal across the street, when they walked into the pawn shop. Liam looked nervous, but Chloe was brazen, smiling as she placed my mother's ring on the counter. We watched as the detectives, who had been waiting inside, calmly approached them. The looks on their faces when the badges came out were more satisfying than I could ever put into words. It was a beautiful, cinematic moment of pure, unadulterated karma. The legal battle was long and messy, but the evidence was overwhelming. The text messages where Liam crafted the cousin narrative, the IP address from Chloe's logins on my laptop, the wire transfer, the security footage from the pawn shop, it all painted a clear picture of conspiracy and grand larceny. They tried to turn on each other, of course, each claiming to be the other's victim, but their web of lies was too tangled, and it collapsed around them both. Liam ended up with a 2-year prison sentence, Chloe with 18 months. I got most of my money back, and most importantly, I got my mother's ring. The day I walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had faced the worst betrayal of my life, not by crumbling, but by fighting back with intelligence and precision. I had lost a future I thought I wanted, but in its place I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. I went home to my apartment, truly my apartment now, with the locks changed and his name scrubbed from the lease, and I held my mother's ring in my hand. It was no longer just a symbol of a future marriage. It was a symbol of my own resilience, a reminder that I was the architect of my own life, and that no one could ever steal that from me again.